Hey YouTube, welcome to the Scout Yard. I'm your host Jason, and this is my co-host
Roland.
In this episode of the Scout Yard, we're going to do a walk around of my 1976 International Scout 2. We're going to talk about where it's been, where it's going, and what we've been doing to it. So stick around.
We'll show ya.
Hi guys, and welcome. Alright, so here's where I'm going to tell you the story of my Scout, and to begin, what I would like to say is I think there's basically three essential items that any Scout owner should know, or should have. The first of which would be this book right here, which is the International Scout Encyclopedia by Jim Allen and John Glancy. John Glancy, of course, is the owner of Super Scout Specialist, which is one of the light line dealers. And Jim Allen is a researcher who's done, I believe, other international books as well. He's affiliated with Binder Books, I think. Really nice guy. He's also on the Binder Bulletin. He will answer questions for you, as he did for me. And that brings me to the second piece of information that any Scout owner would probably want to have access to, and that's called your line set ticket. So this is my line set ticket. It tells me that my truck was built, let's see here, where does it say that? October 9th, 1976, and it was number 2 of 5 that were Gold Star units. So for those of you who didn't know, Gold Star units were sort of like showroom models. They were pre-designated models that showrooms would order so that they could put, or dealers would order so that they could put different model types out in their showrooms, or a owner could just walk in and say, I would like this specific model. Mine was called a Classic Wagon, which is a 100-inch wheelbase and came with all the top dog options. It came with the custom interior and deluxe exterior. It had a 345 with a 727 2-speed Dana 20 transfer case with 307 highway gears. It had bucket seats, a console, auto-locking hubs, radial tires, AM/FM, clock, power steering with tilt, sliding rear windows, door edge guards, carpet kit, side appliques, etc. My list price for mine was $7,428. Pretty nice model. And the reason why I actually purchased my line set ticket was because I was always under the impression that my truck was green. As it turns out, it was not green. It was dark metallic brown. And that's just the paint code or the paint name. Depending on the light, if it's freshly painted, from what I understand, they either looked brown or they looked green. As mine aged, it definitely looked more sort of metallic green, and I loved the color of it. And the reason why I wanted to know that was because the owner that I just picked it up from repainted over the original paint that well, it's a long story that I'll go into in a couple minutes, but he had repainted, rattle canned the outside of the truck, and I want to return it back to its original color. So a line set ticket is one of those items that will tell you all the different pieces of information that you could possibly want. Like, for example, what color was the interior dash pad, what sort of dash bezel did it have. The line set ticket really spells all of that information out for you. The other really important piece of information, if you're going to work on one of these, is getting the truck service manual. I guess there's also a parts manual too that tells you all the different parts, but this is really essential. Don't get a Chilton's if you're going to work in a Scout. Get one of these things right here. They're great. And they're set up for all the different engines, all the different trans that were used. Really indispensable information. They're a little pricey, but they're well worth it. Okay, so the story with my Scout is this. I originally purchased this truck in spring of 2000. I was 26 years old. I had recently received a check from workers' compensation. My finger had gotten crushed at the job site. I was a welder, and I got cut a check for like $2,500 or something like that. The Scout had been sitting in my neighborhood, and I was walking past it on the way to the convenience store on a regular basis and saw it and sort of fell in love with the thing. And lo and behold, the guy who owned it, who was a college kid, was willing to sell it. I believe he sold it to me for $1,700, so that was back in 2000. The truck became my daily driver for about 6 years. In that time, I rebuilt the trans, paid somebody to rebuild the trans, installed an MSD 6A box, a new distributor, did a 2.5-inch skyjacker lift. I did a couple other things, modifications, but for the most part I just did regular maintenance, oil changes, new tires, etc. Fast forward 6 years, and my wife and I had moved into a new house. We were getting ready to start having kids, and she convinced me to sell the Scout as well as our 1970 Carmen Ghia and my 71 Moto Guzzi Ambassador. We needed money, and we had to get rid of those things. And not a day passed that I didn't miss that truck. It was just it's a fantastic truck. I love the thing. And of course, memory makes it seem a lot better than it actually was. But lo and behold, I had to sell the thing. Fast forward again to 2017, and I had been working on my wife for a while to pick something up so that I could work on in the backyard, work on something with my 6-year-old son as he got a little older, and started looking at Scouts, and most of the Scouts I saw were rust buckets, or they had been heavily modified to be rock crawlers, or they had had their fenders cut, they had 350s in them, whatever. So I just decided, there's no way I'm going to be able to find a Scout that's as good as the one I had. So I sort of gave up on the idea. I would have gotten a Bronco, but I didn't have a spare $16,000 laying around for something that's pretty much completely rusted out and needs to be rebuilt. So what I settled on was getting an FJ60, an 87 FJ60. And I had it for a couple months. I bought one. It had a 350. It was a pretty good truck. I was starting to work on it. A couple months passed, and I was looking on Craigslist, and lo and behold, I see this green Scout, and I'm flipping through the pictures, and I see this piece. It's a picture of a handwritten note, and it's a list of modifications that had been done to the truck, and it was in my handwriting. So it was like, the Scout was like coming back to me after all this time. So a couple weeks pass of me trying to get in touch with this guy who owns it, and there's a middleman in between, and it was all very sort of strange. But eventually I got in touch with the owner, and the owner of the Scout was the guy I had sold it to 11 years before. So totally bizarre, right? In that 11 years, he had basically torn into the engine to replace the heads. He had done some work on the trans. He started to put a body lift on the thing. He had bought like a bunch of parts that he didn't install. He had, as I said, he had torn up the top end of the engine and put it back together again, but then had low oil pressure. So he had started to tear back into the engine again, and life got in the way, and he had a kid of his own as well, so he couldn't do anything with the truck. A couple of years pass, and he decides to sell the thing because I think he was getting ready to have yet another kid, and that's when I found it. So I picked it up, and it's back in my house again after owning this truck. Oh, here's the interesting thing. In the time that he had owned this truck, he never registered the vehicle, so the title was still in my name. Still has the original plates on it. In fact, there were like mementos of mine that I had left in the truck that were still in the truck. So it's really weird. It's a really strange story. Seems like it's sort of meant to be. So in essence, I was buying the truck back from myself. In the ensuing 11 years, of course, there's been some value that has increased upon it, so I had to pay a little bit more than I had sold it to him for. But I was more than happy to do it. So I get the truck back, and I got it back on the weekend of my birthday, of my 45th 44th birthday. I think I'm 44, maybe I'm 45. I'm having trouble keeping track these days. And so for the last 3 or 4 months, I've been slowly trying to figure out what he did and what the box of bolts and parts that he had torn off go to, and trying to get the thing back on the road. And as you'll see when I do the walk around, I'm pretty close. I'm very, very close. There's still a lot of work to do, but I'll get there. This is my truck. It's been the only Scout I've ever really thought about owning. It's, in my opinion, the best 4x4, sort of classic vintage 4x4 that you can get your hands on. The prices are still low, and the parts are still kind of difficult to find, but I'm looking forward to building this thing back. And we'll talk a little bit later about what I plan on doing to it, but first we should probably do a walk around. So when I got this truck back, the valve covers were loose, and the previous owner had decked the heads and was having a low oil pressure problem. So what I did was pulled the valve covers off, pulled the intake manifold, thermostat housing, water pump housing, timing cover, an oil pan. I reported the oil pump, put a new water pump on, put a new thermostat on, painted everything, put new water pipes on, new fuel filter, painted the exhaust manifolds. Over on this side you can see that I replaced the power booster, brake master cylinder, the steering rag joint replacement, which is like a hard U-joint. That's pretty much it. That's all I've taken care of. This thing is really close to running right now. I have a Holley 2300 that I'm going to be throwing on, which replaces the old stock 2100. And I got to throw the EGR on and some belts over here, hook up a couple hoses, and for the most part that's it. So that's the engine in the nutshell. This is an International 345. It's the original engine that came with the truck. As you can see, the body's in fairly good shape. I've removed the grill and the radiator. Had the radiator boiled out and had some repairs done to it. It's the original 3-core. So it's a grill from a 72 that goes back in here. Pulled the bumpers. I'll be throwing new bumpers on. I've done mile marker hubs. That was one of the modifications that I did way back when. You can see that the body is pretty straight right down to the end. This is one of my major rust issues right here. You can see it's actually pretty solid. And of course over the rear fenders, which is pretty common, but that's really the only rust this truck has. Hey Roscoe. So the dirt, you know, from, go on. So the dirt from the wheels slides up through that gap and gets trapped in here and builds up. And I've heard of stories of people having like 7 inches of mud just stuck in here, which is why this rusts out. One of the things the PO had done was he had partially installed a 2-inch body lift on this thing. And when I say partially installed, I think he put about 3 of the pucks in and left the rest of them uninstalled, which misaligned the doors. So I finished up that install, which allowed this door to close. But you can see I still have a weird sort of gap right here. The interior of the truck at this point is stripped. Everything is gone from the inside. I have all the components to put back, but everything is stripped out, ready to be cleaned, pressure washed, primered and painted. Probably put some carpet back in, or I'm not really too sure what I'm going to do, to tell you the truth. I've got a Jeep CJ wheel that I resto modded into a Jeep, or into a Scout Rally wheel. It's got the original AC. You know, the interior's kind of rough, dirty, very dirty. Here's another one of my rust issues right here. This is this little seam that helps hold on the gasket for the door. So I have a little bit of rust right there. Most of the rest of what I got going on is like surface rust. You can kind of actually clean it off, to be honest with you. Got a couple dents right here. This is one thing that I've done is I took the lift gate off, popped the glass out, and welded in or re-welded the hinges back in, and rust coated the inside of this so that it wouldn't have any rust issues in the future. And now it actually closes on its own and stays closed. Little dent right here in the cap. This side of the truck is pretty good, although the door, as you can see, is misaligned. I need to do some work on that so that it'll actually close up. Same issue as the other side. I got some bubbling going on here, which oddly enough looks exactly like it did 15 years ago. It doesn't look like it's continued to rust any. This is the crappy rattle can paint that the owner put on. And you can see he like oversprayed. He didn't tape anything off. This is original body damage that was done prior to my owning the truck. And you can see this fender right here. It's got just some Bondo and it's all just chunked up. This whole fender probably should be replaced. The underside looks pretty good, no rust issues. You know, it's just got like your sort of typical surface rust. Here's the great painting job that the PO did. And there it is. Okay, that's going to do it for episode 1 of the Scout Yard. Thanks for joining me. Please give me a thumbs up if you liked what you saw. Maybe hit subscribe too. See if you can motivate me to continue making these episodes. Once again, the reason why I'm doing this is because there are shows out there, numerous shows out there for Broncos, for Jeeps, and for Land Cruisers, etc. And I really thought there ought to be something out there for the International Scout, one of the most iconic 4x4s that was ever made. So once again, thanks for joining me. It was fun. Hopefully we can develop a little bit of a community here of Scout owners to help one another out, get some questions answered. I can share what little knowledge I have with those of you who don't have it, and vice versa. So yeah, stick around, and I'll see you next time on the Scout Yard.